we have gone ahead with our series, which is on modern drama, and this is the, I think, fifth or sixth lecture discussion. And as we begin, I'm thinking of a remark that August Strindberg made in his preface to Miss Julie, and that was also presented in the lecture last time. And the remark was that drama in the modern time, and August Strindberg's modern time was 19th century. He said it's a dying form, and then he said something about it, and the discussion was there in the preface, and I thought that if drama was in the modern times a dying form, then something should be done through the lectures to rejuvenate the form, and maybe at the back of our mind we had that to start this particular series. That apart, that was in lighter vein, but I'd like Professor Nagpal, who is there to present discussion, lead the discussion here, to respond to such a thing, and also tell us about drama's newly gained prowess in the 20th century. And Professor Nagpal, as all of you know, teaches English in Janaki Devi Memorial College, Delhi University, and she is a drama expert, and her views will definitely count. So kindly respond to my particular remark that I quoted from August Strindberg.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So I think for us, when we respond to the statement that drama is a dying form by Strindberg, it appears as if, Ibsen has already written plays, there are other playwrights who are writing, and why is it that, playwrights are looking at it as a form that needs to be rejuvenated? And there is a lot of merit in, what he had written, for the simple reason that right up to the time that Ibsen begins to write, and today's lecture is going to be on Ibsen. So his own work, if you look at the trajectory of his own work, initially he was writing verse plays, he was writing plays that did not have any connection with the issues of the time. And drama in that sense was more like, it included farce, it included vaudeville, but it had stereotypical plots. So it did not pertain to it couldn't catch the pulse of the time. And I think the anxiety stems from that. And the playwrights were conscious of the fact that they were doing something different, that they were coming up with a form for which they are going to be criticized. They are coming up with plays, not only in the written form, but plays that were performed. And this was not going to be a very easy road for them. So I think the comment also, has that anxiety in the backdrop. And, since you mentioned this new prowess to theatre, I think this is also the time period when the whole idea of writing a play and performing it gains a new dimension, because it's also about stage design, the way sets are to be conceptualized, the use of music. In a sense, different forms were, becoming more integrated into, the idea of performance as such.
Since today's discussion is on Ibsen, as you pointed out, and you will be sharing your responses with the audience here. How does Ibsen distinguish from August Strindberg? And they were contemporaries. They were both in the 19th century, and from different parts of Europe, they were talking about the drama form.
Well, I think the primary difference, if one was to say it, because it's very difficult to do this, because Ibsen's own work is quite vast and varied in that sense. As I said, that the first set of plays that Ibsen wrote were plays that did not, in a sense, they were not really a continuation of the kind of farcical plots that were there, but they were plays that tried to look at, for instance, Scandinavian history, Viking honor, Icelandic sagas, but they did not connect with the audience at all. And this was something that he realized, and he was influenced, of course, by other thinkers of the time like Brandes and so on, and they felt that there was a new voice that was required, and this new voice was provided by Ibsen. But when we come to Strindberg, whose plays in a sense They are of course contemporaries, but the kind of plays that Ibsen writes later, I mean in the last phase I think of his work, are the kind of plays that Strindberg is a playwright that we can associate with. For instance, an emphasis on interiority, the inner thoughts, what does, let's say, moving from the drawing room into, let's say, the attic space. And that is something that is very, very significant in Ibsen's later work and Strindberg's work largely. You mentioned Miss Julie. So Miss Julie is a play where, for instance, a dream sequence has been used. And it's not something in isolation. It is rooted pretty much in, the real-time issues that Strindberg was raising in the play. So, but since we are talking here about Ibsen, and it's important to map this movement, really speaking, in Ibsen's work, because as mentioned that he's also responding to the times, and it's very significant that whenever we begin with what we call modern European drama, for instance, we begin with Ibsen, and there's a reason for that. There's a rationale for it, which is that the voice of modernity, in that sense, is on stage. Is brought by Ibsen. So we'll briefly look at some aspects of his life, and also look at what, really speaking, Ibsen was responding to in the first half, and then move on to a brief discussion of some of the issues raised in his plays. So he was born in 1828 and lived up to 1906, which is a long phase. He was born in a place called Skien in Norway, into a middle-class merchant family, and after loss in business, the family shifted to a village outside Skien, and in 1844 Ibsen started as an apprentice to an apothecary in a place called Grimstad. From there he moved to Christiania, that is present-day Oslo, and he joined the National Theatre at Bergen. He became the artistic director and manager later of the Norwegian theatre, which shut down due to some kind of financial problems. And as he joined the Christiania Theatre, he also received an allowance to travel abroad, and this is where, when he moved to Italy, a long phase begins where his travels abroad also give him a different kind of exposure. It's interesting that Ibsen attended, the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 as a Norwegian delegate. He then moves back permanently to Norway only in about 1889, and he died in Christiania in 1902. The reason I'm sharing these details, very, very brief details about his life, are to point out that throughout his life he remained absolutely integrated with the world on stage, both at the level of writing and at the level of performance, because working as manager, working as artistic director meant that somebody like Ibsen was able to visualize theatre in a very specific form. And this is the time of naturalistic theatre, where we have the idea of the invisible fourth wall. And if we look at stage instructions for especially the realist cycle of the second phase, that is the middle phase of Ibsen's plays, starting with plays like The Pillars of Society, we look at the stage space in a very, very specific way, which is generally referred to as the drawing room scenario, that the audiences, it's almost as if the audience is peeping into somebody's drawing room, but the performers have to perform in a way that they think that nobody is watching them, and the audience has to watch everything quietly. So there is this invisible line that is drawn, and there is, in that sense, no interaction between the actors and the audience. So, and before we, kind of move on, we need to keep a few points, in mind, and these are important, because we also need to understand, when we talk about this change, and we talk about Ibsen's work as cutting edge, and we say that Ibsen made this very, very significant contribution and is the voice of modernity, what was really speaking happening before Ibsen writes, and how is it that as a genre in drama things are happening at the end of the 19th century, something that touches fiction much earlier. So we the 19th century in a sense inherits two very important ideas from the 18th century: the importance of observation and rational thought, where fiction, especially the genre of the novel, began to focus on the common man, the common human being as the protagonist. It is only towards the end of the 19th century, with the kind of plays that Ibsen writes, that the ordinary, and here ordinary would generally, and one can of course critique Ibsen for it, broadly, referring to the middle class. So the shifts and turns in the genre of drama, in that sense, in the 18th and 19th century, are very, very important. So if in fiction, Fielding, for instance, spoke about the ordinary, the hero, to be somebody like Joseph Andrews, or Balzac in the 19th century said that I describe not men but manners. So this idea of describing human beings and the world in which human beings live, that is the society, the times, their likes, dislikes, the changes that are taking place, all at the level of the society, the material expression, in a sense, all these factors are taken into consideration, in a sense, in Ibsen's work. So in terms of the trajectory, so from the tragedies of the 18th century, one moved to romantic drama, a significant play there being George Lillo's the London Merchant, and from there, throughout the 19th century, broadly, during the romantic phase, plays meant to be read and not performed. And when plays that were meant to be performed took their place, we had writers like Eugene Scribe, Victorine Sardou, and others who produced plays with, as mentioned, like a stereotypical plot, with vaudevilles and farce that, really speaking, ruled the stage. What did this really speaking mean? This meant that there was no introspection. This meant that a class that had become very powerful, was gradually becoming very powerful in the 19th century, was acquiring, money, was acquiring social station, did not want itself to be visibly critiqued. And I'm using this word very carefully because visible critique, theatre, performance carries with it the sense of a visible, evident performance. So this would have certainly threatened the bourgeois class, and which is why Zola urges for a new kind of writing, and he says that the tragic formula of laughter and tears, together on stage, all this needs to be brought in a different form. And he says that writers like Alexander Dumas Fils and Émile Augier, all these are midgets, besides a writer like Balzac. So what Balzac was doing in the novel was required on stage. And so Zola says that when will such a writer appear, and we must hope and wait. And I'm sharing the very famous quotation here by Émile Zola, who brings in the idea of naturalism, the idea that it is important to bring in heredity and environment. With this, in a sense, the stage is set. There is a kind of vacuum that needs to be filled. And this vacuum, there's a realization that somebody needs to talk about the lives of the ordinary people. It can't all be a stereotypical plot with a happy resolution, but there needs to be a questioning. And in Ibsen's own work, his association with the world of stage made him realize that the future, like Zola had said, the future is with naturalism, and the formula had to be found. And this formula, in a sense, is found, one can say with confidence, by Ibsen. And in fact, the Danish critic and scholar Georges Brandes was very critical of the way things were in Danish literature, and we know that Scandinavian history in this sense is very, very closely bound. We have Norway, Denmark, and Sweden with shared history. So, moving out of this shared terrain, it was important for a writer like Ibsen to come out with something that he believed in. So, Brandes was very critical of Ibsen's play Bran and said that Ibsen's moral principles, if realized, would cause half of mankind to starve to death for the sake of an ideal, which meant that you didn't have to really present the ideal on stage. You had to present society the way it was. And this is where, Brandes himself translated writers like John Stuart Mill, and Darwin's Origin of Species, which meant rationality. And this is broadly termed as the modern breakthrough movement. And within this movement, we place Ibsen as well, who writes to provide at least a certain set of questions to the people to think about. So, it is important to keep in mind that industrialization, something that begins in England much earlier, takes place much later. In the case of, Norway, the railway line coming only in about 1854. And primarily what we're looking at is a shipping community and how, society is changing, and these factors are realized in, Ibsen. So here I'd request Professor Prakash to respond to this placement of Ibsen against, the social background of the 19th century and against, this vacuum that is there in a sense on stage, and there is, really speaking, no other playwright before Ibsen that who really talks about, the issues of the time.
I think you have presented a very fine analysis of the 19th century life, particularly with respect to culture. And this question was forming in my mind when you were speaking regarding, modernity as a concept, which is also changing from time to time. The earlier modernity of the 16th century, 17th century, 18th century were different from the 19th century. And the point that struck me particularly was regarding, modernity this time coming through fiction more than through other forms, and therefore drama has to catch up. Yes. And catching up by drama with the fiction of the time, which was about the common people, that perhaps made some kind of a significant change in the form of drama, and this you have explained very lucidly. And with respect to modernity particularly, I think this point should be considered, viewers, by all of you also, and this is a good point that has struck me. The point regarding modernity being inherent in the nature of the middle class, in the nature of the common people. And drama was not about the common people earlier. Common people might be drawing a laughter or a kind of getting an entertainment, but when it came on to the stage, then the life would be shown from a distance.
Yes.
And as you have rightly pointed out, Ibsen was instrumental in bringing that common people onto the stage, and there the audience would actually look at themselves through the stage. When the fourth wall was removed, then maybe conceptually the people from the front they entered the stage and they made their presence felt there. So I think it's a very fine insight, and it's a different kind of modernity. Viewers, modernity is going to change further, in the 20th century, and that will be a different kind of modernity. So this question is to be always kept in mind as to what is modern. So modern means keeping up with the pace that life produces. And in drama, why didn't it happen as well in England as it happened in Norway or Sweden? And this is a question that naturally would occur, that drama lagged behind in England, and as you rightly said, that modern drama starts with Ibsen, who is from Norway.
Yes.
So say something about this.
This is interesting because I think maybe we can, since we are talking about the rise of the middle class in the 19th century, I think it takes a while for this kind of a critique to really speaking appear in England. the interesting aspect is that even when we look at Ibsen's plays, for instance, when A Dollhouse is performed or Ghosts was performed, it's completely rejected. People wanted to change the ending of A Dollhouse, and people wanted to absolutely reject. It's performed in Norway much later. In fact, the first performance takes place in Chicago. So I think it takes a while for this kind of an understanding of stage and its relationship, in a sense, to the problems of the time that varied, really speaking. So it's drama in the sense of modernity is more European in that sense than English or British, so to say. So yes, that's true.
And regarding this change in ending, and compelling the drama to change its course because people didn't like it, what exactly is this?
Yes, so I'll be talking about this in my discussion on A Dollhouse, and I'm specifically referring to, general parlance, it's referred to as A Doll's House. And there is, a question related to this. Is it really a doll's house? Does the house belong to Nora? Because women could not own property, and the house, in a sense, never belonged to it. It was more like a kind of spectacle that was just preserved in a certain form. And so some, in fact, a lot of modern critics prefer the title in terms of translation, A Dollhouse. So I've been using that, and
the woman is not a doll, but the house is a doll.
The house is a doll, and within the institution of marriage, such a house is only a doll house. And Nora, in a sense, then rejects that role, and she moves out of the doll house. And this was something that people absolutely could not take, and especially interestingly in Germany, this ending was rejected and they wanted another ending. So these are some of the aspects that...
Which is, feminism was in the air at that time, and people wouldn't have liked a doll's house kind of a title. Was that the case?
Well, this issue about the translation of the title appears later. So, but yes, certainly feminism was in the air, because, we are talking about a time period when soon enough in England, we will have the first wave and so on. The first wave had, in a sense, already begun, but, is going to acquire a very, very strong formation, in the early years of the 20th century, and of course the right to vote. But in this kind of, feminism that Ibsen presented in his plays was certainly way ahead of its time, and it is, there can be a lot of points on which one can raise questions about Ibsen's work, but the important point is that this kind of an idea was brought out on stage by this Norwegian playwright.
And the other parts of Europe then followed it, took the example from there.
Yes, and Strindberg and other writers, of
and
course.
They started, taking a different look at the behavior, at the value system that women preserved, presented at that point of time.
Yes, so the Strindberg, Pirandello, and then of course we have political theatre with, Piscator and Bertolt Brecht and so on. So yes, certainly, but this is, which is why, modernity is brought in a very significant way through Ibsen's work here.
And modernity means, I repeat, modernity means concerning oneself with the lower masses and the middle class, and among the lower masses and the middle class, it is specifically women.
Yes.
That they talk about, that this person would be, Ibsen would be focusing upon.
In fact, at one point, Ibsen says that there has to be change. The change will come from the working man and the woman. He states that very clearly. So,
you were talking about fiction earlier, and in fiction this kind of emphasis had occurred, but drama had to wait, I think, for Ibsen to get women onto the stage, and from there they talk back to the society which consists of both men and women.
Which is where actually, Zola is very important, and as is Brandes, the Danish critic, because they're talking about this urgent need for change, and this ties up with Ibsen's own realization that what he had been writing, for instance, Vikings of Helgeland and so on, was something that had to undergo a change. It did not. It was not something that was going to, really speaking, be an answer to the kind of questions that were being raised by writers like Zola and Brandes.
So, friends, we have had a discussion, a very useful discussion on the 19th century drama, particularly characterized through the plays of Ibsen, and there is a question of modernity that is changing its shape under the pressures that exist in the 19th century. And in the next part of the lecture, we would have a closer view of a few plays, chosen plays by Ibsen. And thank you.